The folding table wobbled every time my 5-year-old son Leo tried to cut his dry turkey. We were sitting in the hallway, physically separated from the dining room by a sliding glass door that my stepmother Karen had accidentally left half closed. Through the glass I could see them, the golden family in their golden light. My father Robert was carving a second helping of the honey-glazed ham, the one I'd spent 4 hours prepping yesterday before being told there wasn't enough room for me at the main table today. My stepmother was laughing her head, thrown back the diamond necklace I knew she'd bought with Dad's retirement fund, glittering against her throat. And then there was Tiffany, my half-sister, the golden child. She was holding court at the head of the table, her phone propped up against a crystal goblet as she live-streamed the dinner to her 3,000 followers. "Mommy," Leo whispered, tugging on the sleeve of my faded sweater. "Why can't we sit with Grandpa? It's cold out here." I forced a smile, tucking a stray curl behind his ear. The draft from the front door was cutting right through us, but I couldn't let him see my anger. Not today. "Grandpa and Grandma have a lot of important guests, baby. We're having our own special picnic. Look, I brought the hot sauce you like." It was a lie, and a pathetic one. The important guests were just them. The 4 chairs at the main table were occupied by Dad, Karen, Tiffany, and surprisingly, my Aunt Sarah. Sarah was Dad's older sister, the black sheep turned matriarch, who'd made a fortune in real estate and terrified everyone in the family except me. She had been in Europe for the past 3 months, and her surprise arrival 20 minutes ago had sent Karen into a panic. I hadn't even had a chance to say hello to her yet. Karen had immediately ushered me to the folding table in the hall, claiming the dining room was too crowded for a high chair, even though Leo hadn't used a high chair in 3 years. I watched Aunt Sarah through the glass. She wasn't eating. She was sitting ramrod straight, her sharp gray eyes darting around the room, dissecting the scene. She looked at the lavish spread on the table, then at Tiffany's manicured hands waving around a fork, and then her gaze drifted to the hallway. Our eyes met. For a second, her expression softened, a flash of genuine pain crossing her face, before she turned back to my father with a look that could have curdled milk. "So," Aunt Sarah's voice carried through the open crack of the door, cutting through Tiffany's monologue about her haters. "Robert, you didn't tell me Elena was joining us, or that you'd relegated her to the drafty corridor like a servant." Karen choked on her wine. "Oh, Sarah, don't be dramatic. Elena prefers it there. Leo is boisterous. We didn't want him to ruin your welcome home dinner." "I see," Sarah said, her voice dangerously calm. "And I assume Elena prefers wearing a coat indoors while Tiffany is wearing whatever that is." Tiffany rolled her eyes, not even looking away from her phone screen. "It's vintage Gucci, Aunt Sarah. You wouldn't get it. And honestly, Elena is fine. She's used to being in the background. It's her vibe." I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Used to it. That was the family motto. Elena is used to the hand-me-downs. Elena is used to missing the family vacation because someone needs to watch the dogs. Elena is used to paying for her own college while Tiffany gets a brand new convertible for getting a C average. But I wasn't just Elena the scapegoat anymore. I was a pediatric nurse who worked 60-hour weeks. I was a single mother raising a brilliant, kind boy without a dime of child support. I had value. I just had to keep reminding myself of that because no one in this house ever would. Before I tell you how I burn this dinner to the ground, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. You do not want to miss the look on my stepmother's face when the police arrive. Trust me. The sliding door suddenly rattled open. Aunt Sarah stood there holding her plate. "Move over, Tiffany," she commanded, not waiting for a response. She grabbed her chair and dragged it, loudly scraping the expensive hardwood floors out of the dining room and right up to our wobbly folding table in the hall. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Karen shrieked, half rising from her seat. "Having dinner with the only people in this house I actually like?" Sarah muttered, sitting down next to Leo. She winked at him. "Hey, Tiger, is that turkey as dry as sawdust? Here, have some of my ham." My heart swelled. This was the Aunt Sarah I loved, the woman who had let me live with her for 4 months earlier this year when she shattered her hip and needed round-the-clock care. The woman who, unlike my father, actually asked me how my day was. "Aunt Sarah, you don't have to—" "Hush," she said, cutting into her meat. "I missed you, kid. Europe was beautiful, but the French are exhausting and the Italians drive like maniacs. I wanted to see you the moment I landed, but Robert insisted on this charade." Karen and Dad awkwardly shuffled their chairs to face us, trying to maintain the illusion of a united family dinner, despite the fact that half the party was now in the hallway. Tiffany huffed, finally putting her phone down. "Great. Now the lighting is terrible because you moved the focal point. Thanks, Aunt Sarah." "You're welcome," Sarah said dryly. "So tell me, Tiffany, Robert tells me you finally moved out of the basement. Did you get a job?" Tiffany laughed a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "A job, Auntie, please. I'm a content creator. My brand is my job. And yes, I moved out. I have the most insane apartment now. It's literally a loft downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick, a chef's kitchen. It's perfect for my cooking series." I froze. A loft downtown Tiffany had zero income. Dad and Karen were comfortable, but they weren't buy a luxury loft in the city rich. They had been complaining about money for months, using it as an excuse to not help me with Leo's dental bills. "A loft," Sarah repeated, her eyes narrowing. "Downtown, that sounds expensive." "It's an investment," Karen interjected quickly, her smile tight and predatory. "We decided that Tiffany needed a space that reflected her potential. You know, to launch her career. It's important to support our children's dreams, Sarah. I'm sure you understand." "I understand supporting children," Sarah said, her gaze flickering to me. "I'm just surprised you could afford a downtown loft, Robert. Last I checked, you were borrowing money against the house for the roof repairs." Dad cleared his throat, avoiding Sarah's eyes. "Well, you know things worked out. We came into some opportunities." Tiffany beamed. "It's amazing. I have a walk-in closet the size of Elena's entire apartment. No offense, Elena, but really you should come see it sometime. Maybe you could come clean it for me. I'm looking for a maid, and I'd rather pay family than a stranger." Leo looked up confused. "Mommy cleans people's boo-boos, not houses." "It's a joke, Leo," Tiffany sneered. My blood was boiling, but I took a deep breath. I wouldn't let her bait me. I had something else on my mind. I had been waiting for a quiet moment to thank Aunt Sarah. 2 months ago, on my 29th birthday, a small package had arrived at my tiny, cramped apartment. Inside was a keychain, a cheap plastic replica of the Eiffel Tower, the kind you buy in bulk at a tourist trap for €2. There was a note attached, written in Karen's handwriting but signed Aunt Sarah, that said, "Hope this reminds you to dream big. Enjoy Paris." It was a strange gift. Aunt Sarah was wealthy, yes, but she wasn't usually cheap. However, I knew she had been traveling, and the fact that she had thought of me at all, that she had sent anything while she was halfway across the world, meant the world to me. I cherished that keychain. I kept it on my key ring next to my pepper spray. It was a reminder that someone out there cared, even if it was just a token. I reached into my purse, which was hanging off the back of my chair. "Aunt Sarah," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I wanted to thank you." The table went quiet. Karen's eyes darted to me, suddenly sharp and alert. "Elena, not now," she hissed. "We're talking about Tiffany's apartment." "No, I want to say this." I insisted, pulling the keychain out. I held it up. The silver paint was already chipping, revealing the pink plastic underneath. "For my birthday, I know you were busy traveling and you didn't have to send anything, but getting this, it really meant a lot to me, just knowing you were thinking of me." I smiled at her genuine tears pricking my eyes. "Thank you for the keychain, Aunt Sarah. I love it." For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound in the house was the humming of the refrigerator. Aunt Sarah stopped chewing. She slowly lowered her fork to her plate with a distinct clink. She stared at the plastic trinket dangling from my fingers, as if I were holding a live grenade. Her brow furrowed, creating deep lines in her forehead. She looked from the keychain to me, then to Karen, and finally to Dad. "The what?" Sarah asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "The keychain." I repeated, feeling a sudden knot of anxiety form in my stomach. Had I embarrassed her? Was it too cheap to mention the Eiffel Tower? You sent it for my birthday. With the note, Sarah's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was iron strong. She pulled my hand closer, inspecting the cheap piece of junk. Then she looked up, and the expression on her face made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was a cold, hard, terrifying rage. "Elena," she said, her voice steady and low, "I didn't send you a keychain." Karen stood up so abruptly her chair tipped over backward. "More wine. Who wants more wine? Tiffany, tell Aunt Sarah about your new curtains." "Sit down, Karen," Sarah barked. The command was so authoritative that Karen actually froze in place. Sarah turned back to me, her eyes intense. "Elena, listen to me very carefully. I did not send you a $2 piece of plastic for your birthday." "But the package," I stammered, confused. "It came to Dad's house because I was at work and Karen brought it over." "I sent a package to this house, yes," Sarah said, her eyes drilling holes into my father, who was now pale and sweating profusely. "I sent it via International Priority Courier. It required a signature, but inside that package was not a keychain." She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen a few times with aggressive stabs of her finger, then slammed the phone down on the folding table in front of me. "Read that," she commanded. I looked at the screen. It was an email confirmation from a high-end real estate law firm in the city. The subject line read, "Deed transfer complete. Elena Rossi." I scanned the document, my brain refusing to process the words. Property address 4500 Skyline Boulevard, Penthouse B. Ownership transferred to Elena Rossi. Paid in full. "I bought you an apartment," Sarah said, her voice rising, trembling with fury. "Not just an apartment. The penthouse on Skyline Boulevard. I bought it cash. I had the deed transferred to your name. I sent you the deed and the keys for your birthday because I knew you were struggling in that shoebox, and I wanted to say thank you for taking care of me when I broke my hip. When these people," she gestured violently at Dad and Karen, "couldn't be bothered to visit." I stared at her, my mouth gaping open. You bought me a penthouse, $500,000 penthouse," Sarah clarified. "I sent the keys. I sent the legal documents. And I assume—" She slowly turned her head toward the dining room, toward Tiffany, who was now clutching her phone to her chest, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. "I assume," Sarah continued, her voice dripping with venom, "that is the downtown loft Tiffany has been bragging about for the last 20 minutes. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence where you can hear a life shattering. I looked at Tiffany. The color had drained from her face beneath her layers of bronzer. I looked at Dad. He was staring at his honey-glazed ham as if hoping it would swallow him whole. I looked at Karen. She was trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the dining table. It was a misunderstanding," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking. "Sarah, you have to listen. It was too much. You can't just give a girl like Elena a penthouse. She wouldn't know how to maintain it. The HOA fees alone. We were trying to protect her." "Protect me," I whispered, standing up. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "You protected me by stealing my house and giving it to Tiffany." "We didn't steal it," Tiffany yelled, suddenly finding her voice. "We were house-sitting. Mom said Aunt Sarah bought it as a family investment, and I could live there because I needed the content studio. I didn't know it was yours." "Liar," Sarah hissed. "I have the letter right here." She swiped on her phone. "A thank you letter, signed Elena. Dear Aunt Sarah, thank you so much for the apartment. I'm so overwhelmed. I think it's best if Tiffany stays there for a while to help me decorate." "Did you write this, Elena?" "I never saw that letter in my life," I said, my voice shaking. "I wrote a thank you note for a keychain, a plastic keychain. They forged your signature," Sarah said, standing up. She looked like a giant. "They intercepted my gift, stole the deed, forged a letter from you, effectively giving up possession, and then bought a piece of trash from a dollar store to distract you so you wouldn't ask questions." She turned to my father. "Robert, look at me." Dad slowly looked up. He looked like a broken man, but I felt no pity. None. You let your wife and your daughter steal a $500,000 home from your other daughter, Sarah asked. The daughter who works herself to the bone. The daughter who raises your grandson. Tiffany needed a break. Dad mumbled, his voice pathetic. She's been depressed. She needed a win. Elena is strong. She can handle the struggle. Tiffany can't. I felt like I had been slapped. Elena is strong. That was the excuse. That was always the excuse. Because I could survive the pain, they felt justified in piling more on me. Because I didn't break when they treated me like garbage, they thought I was made of it. I am strong, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I looked at Tiffany, who was shrinking in her seat. I am strong enough to survive without your help, but I'm not stupid. I turned to Sarah. Is the deed in my name legally 100%? Sarah said, crossing her arms. I have the digital copies. The hard copies are probably in Karen's safe, but that doesn't matter. The county records show Elena Rossi as the sole owner. Good, I said. I looked at Tiffany. Then you're trespassing. You can't kick me out. Tiffany screamed, tears finally streaming down her face, ugly panic tears. I just decorated. I have a housewarming party planned for Saturday. My followers think I bought it. You can't humiliate me like this. Get your purse, I told Leo, picking up his backpack. Where are we going? Karen asked, stepping forward, trying to block the hallway. Elena, let's be reasonable. We can discuss this. Maybe we can work out a rent-to-own situation. Tiffany has already moved all her things in. I'm not negotiating with thieves, I said, brushing past her. Aunt Sarah, do you have your car? Waiting outside, Sarah said, grabbing her coat. And I'm driving. Elena. Dad stood up, desperation in his voice. It's Thanksgiving. You can't just leave. We're family. I stopped at the door. The wind was howling outside, but it felt warmer than the air in that dining room. I looked back at them, the spilled wine, the cold turkey, the shattered illusion of their perfect life. No, Dad, I said. Family doesn't steal your future to save their image. Tiffany, you have exactly 1 hour to get out of my apartment before I call the police. And don't think about taking the furniture. Aunt Sarah sent me the inventory list, too. You wouldn't dare, Tiffany hissed. You're just a jealous little nurse. I pulled my phone out. I'm the owner, I said, and I'm heading there right now to change the locks. I grabbed Leo's hand and walked out into the cold November air, Aunt Sarah right beside me. As the door slammed shut, I could hear the screaming start inside. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The leather seats of Aunt Sarah's Mercedes were heated, a luxury I wasn't used to, but I still couldn't stop shivering. The city lights blurred past the window as Sarah navigated the rain-slicked streets with the aggressive precision of a tank commander. In the back seat, Leo had fallen asleep, clutching his backpack to his chest, oblivious to the fact that his mother had just declared war on his grandparents. The silence in the car was heavy, filled with the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thwack hiss of the windshield wipers. I stared at the dashboard, my mind replaying the image of that plastic Eiffel Tower keychain dangling from my fingers. The cheap silver paint, the jagged seam where the plastic had been molded. I had cherished that thing. I had kept it on my key ring like a holy relic, a talisman of proof that I was loved. And the whole time, it was just a decoy, a $2 distractor to keep me from noticing they had stolen $500,000 from me. I need to know, I said, my voice sounding small in the quiet cabin. I need to know how they did it, and why. Why would they do this to me, Aunt Sarah? I'm their daughter. I'm her sister. Sarah tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles pale. Because they are parasites, Elena. And parasites don't care about the host. They only care about feeding. She glanced at me, her expression softening from rage to a deep, sorrowful pity. To understand the theft, you have to go back to the hip, to 6 months ago. Do you remember? How could I forget? 6 months ago, the family received the call that Aunt Sarah had fallen down the marble staircase of her estate, a complex fracture of the hip. At 72, that kind of injury is often the beginning of the end. The doctors said she would need months of intensive rehabilitation, 24-hour care and assistance with the most basic human functions. She couldn't walk, couldn't bathe alone, couldn't even cook a meal. I remember the family meeting, I said bitterly. We had gathered in the sterile waiting room of Mount Sinai Hospital. Dad, Karen, Tiffany, and me. The doctor had just explained that Sarah was being discharged but couldn't live alone. She needed a live-in caretaker or a nursing home. She's not going to a home, Dad had declared, puffing out his chest. She's family. Family takes care of family. Exactly, Karen had chirped, looking at her manicure. But, well, you know how sensitive I am to medical smells, Robert. The hospital antiseptic just gives me migraines, and with my anxiety, I really can't be responsible for someone falling again. I'd never forgive myself. All eyes had turned to Tiffany. She was 24, unemployed, and living in the basement. She had literally nothing to do but make TikToks. Don't look at me, Tiffany had snapped, recoiling as if we'd asked her to clean a sewer. I'm building my brand right now. I can't disappear to Aunt Sarah's dusty old mansion for months. There's no Wi-Fi in the guest wing. Besides, old people, they have needs. It's gross. Dad had sighed the weight of the world on his shoulders. I have the business to run. I can't take months off. And then, as always, the silence had stretched until it landed on me. The nurse, the fixer, the one who didn't complain. I'll do it, I had said. But you have a job. Dad had pointed out, not arguing, just stating a fact. And the kid. I'll take a leave of absence, I said. I have FMLA, and I can bring Leo. He loves Aunt Sarah. They had all let out a collective breath of relief. They didn't thank me. They just looked resolved, as if the natural order of the universe had righted itself. The scapegoat had taken the burden. The golden child was free to continue scrolling. I moved in with you 2 days later, I told Sarah now as we merged onto the highway toward downtown. I remember. You did more than move in, Sarah corrected me. You saved me. For 4 months, I lived in Sarah's guest room. It wasn't a vacation. It was grueling, back-breaking labor. I was the one who lifted her out of bed when she screamed in pain. I was the one who helped her to the bathroom, preserving her dignity as best I could while wiping her down because she couldn't shower. I cooked every meal according to her strict anti-inflammatory diet. I drove her to physical therapy 3 times a week, pushing her wheelchair through the rain, cheering her on when she wanted to give up. I managed her medications, organized her bills, and sat by her bedside when the depression of losing her independence hit her in the middle of the night. And where was the rest of the family? They visited, Sarah said, her voice dripping with acid. Once a month, like clockwork. I nodded. Dad would come for Sunday dinner. He came to check on the will, Sarah corrected. I saw the way he looked at my antique silver while you were in the kitchen blending my soup. He wasn't worried about my hip. He was worried about his inheritance. He wanted to make sure I wasn't going senile and giving money away to charity. And Karen came to criticize your cleaning, Sarah snorted. Do you remember she ran a finger over the mantelpiece while you were changing my bandages and told you there was dust? You had been up for 36 hours straight with Leo having the flu and me having a fever, and she had the audacity to talk about dust. And Tiffany, I trailed off. Tiffany came once, Sarah said. She took a selfie next to my hospital bed, captioned it, "Praying for my warrior, #family first," and then asked if she could borrow my vintage Chanel bag. When I said no, she pouted in the car for an hour until Robert bought her ice cream. Sarah merged lanes, aggressively cutting off a taxi. I watched it all, Elena. When you're sick, people think you're invisible. They stop pretending. I saw how you worked yourself into the ground for me. I saw how you loved me not for what I could give you, but because I was family. And I saw how they treated you like hired help. No worse than help. You pay help. They treated you like a utility, like a refrigerator, expected to work, ignored until you break. So you bought the apartment, I whispered. I wanted to change your life, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I knew you were drowning in rent for that damp apartment near the hospital. I knew you were picking up extra shifts just to buy Leo new shoes. I wanted to give you a foundation, a A castle. I found the place on Skyline Boulevard. It was a foreclosure, a steal at $400,000 cash, but it needed work. I hired the contractors myself from my hospital bed. I had them paint it that soft sage green you like. I had them install the deep soaking tub because I know your back hurts after your shifts. I covered my mouth with my hand, tears springing to my eyes. The sage green. She remembered. I wanted it to be a surprise, she continued. I closed on the property in September, right before I left for Europe. I didn't want to give it to you in person because, well, I'm an old sentimental fool and I hate crying in front of people. So I had the law firm courier the package. To Dad's house, I realized. You were working double shifts that week, Sarah explained, and your mailbox at your apartment is broken. Half your mail gets stolen. I thought Robert's house was safe. I thought he's her father. He'll be excited for her. I addressed it to you, to Elena Rossi, personal and confidential. The car slowed down as we took the exit for downtown. The skyline loomed ahead, the tall glass buildings piercing the stormy sky. One of those lights belonged to me. Karen signed for it, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a growl. I saw the tracking signature later, K. Rossi. She must have opened it immediately. She saw the deed. She saw the keys. She saw a gift worth more than she's ever earned in her life given to the daughter she despises. I could picture it perfectly. Karen standing in her marble foyer holding the heavy envelope, the curiosity getting the better of her, slitting it open, seeing the golden keys, reading the deed. The jealousy must have tasted like bile in her throat. Elena, why Elena? And then the entitlement setting in. Tiffany deserves this. Tiffany needs this. They held a meeting, didn't they? I asked, feeling sick. Oh, I'm sure of it, Sarah said. A family council of thieves. They probably rationalized it over wine. Elena is used to being poor. A penthouse would just overwhelm her. The taxes are too high. She'd just sell it anyway. But Tiffany needs a break. Tiffany needs a venue for her career. They convinced themselves they were doing you a favor by stealing it. And the letter, that was the master stroke, Sarah said, shaking her head. They needed to keep me quiet while I was in Europe. They knew if I didn't hear from you, I'd call. So they forged a letter. It was clever, I'll give them that. They used your stationery. Karen probably swiped a piece from your bag years ago. They mimicked your handwriting. They wrote about how generous the gift was, but how you had discussed it with Dad and Karen, and decided that since you were so busy with work, Tiffany should house sit and manage the renovations for a while. They made it sound like you gave it to her. So when I didn't mention it, I thought you were just being modest, Sarah said, or that you were busy. I got the letter. I was a little disappointed you gave up the space so quickly, but I trusted you. I thought, well, Elena is generous to a fault. I didn't know you had no idea the apartment even existed. The car came to a stop at a red light. Sarah turned to me, her eyes blazing. But the keychain, Elena, that is what I cannot forgive. That is psychopathic. The keychain. My mind flashed back to my birthday dinner 2 months ago. It hadn't been a party. Just me stopping by Dad's house after work to pick up a card. I had walked in, tired, wearing my scrubs. Karen was in the kitchen. She had smiled that tight, fake smile that never reached her eyes and handed me a small, lumpy envelope. From Aunt Sarah, she had said. It came with a bunch of Dad's mail. I had opened it right there. I pulled out the plastic Eiffel Tower. It was light, hollow, cheap. But to me, it was precious. I had teared up. I remembered hugging the plastic to my chest. She remembered, I had whispered. She remembered I always wanted to go to Paris. I looked at Karen then. I remembered her face. She wasn't looking at me with pity. She was watching me with a smug, satisfied glint in her eyes. She was watching me cry over a $2 piece of trash while she had the keys to my penthouse in her pocket. She was enjoying it. She was savoring the fact that I was so starved for affection that I would accept crumbs and call it a feast. She watched me cry. I told Sarah, my voice shaking with a new, colder kind of anger. I cried, Sarah. I told her to tell you thank you. I told her it was the best gift I got. And she let you believe it, Sarah said. She let you walk out of that house with a piece of garbage thinking you were loved while she handed your legacy to her brat of a daughter. They didn't just steal a house, Elena. They stole your dignity. They laughed at your gratitude. The light turned green. Sarah slammed on the gas. Well, she said, her jaw set. They're not laughing anymore. We turned onto Skyline Boulevard. It was a street I had driven past 1,000 times, looking up at the gleaming towers, imagining what kind of people lived there. Doctors, lawyers, tech moguls, people who mattered. Which building on, I asked. The Legacy Tower. Sarah said, pointing to a beautiful pre-war building that had been gutted and modernized. It had a doorman, a marble lobby, and balconies with wrought iron railings. Penthouse B, top floor, corner unit, views of the river and the city. She pulled the car up to the curb right in front of the golden awning. The rain was coming down harder now, a deluge that felt appropriate for the storm we were about to bring inside. The doorman knows me, Sarah said, putting the car in park. He knows the unit belongs to the Rossi family. He's been letting Tiffany in because she has the keys and claims to be your sister. But the deed is in your name. I have the digital copy on my phone, and I just emailed a PDF to the building management 10 minutes ago labeled unauthorized occupant. I looked back at Leo. He was stirring, rubbing his eyes. Are we home, Mommy? I unbuckled my seatbelt. I looked up at the top floor where the lights were blazing. I could see shadows moving against the windows. Tiffany, probably filming a day-in-the-life video in my kitchen, probably sitting on my sofa. Yes, baby, I said, reaching back to squeeze his hand. We're home. We just have to clean up a little mess first. I turned to Sarah. She was already out of the car, standing in the rain, popping the trunk to get her cane. She looked like an avenging angel in a Burberry trench coat. Ready? She asked, opening my door. I stepped out into the rain. The cold water hit my face, waking me up, washing away the fatigue, the doubt, the years of being the quiet one, the nice one, the one who takes the folding table in the hallway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the plastic Eiffel Tower keychain. I looked at it one last time. Then I walked over to the sewer grate by the curb and dropped it. It fell with a silent plop into the darkness below. I'm ready, I said. We walked into the lobby. The doorman, a burly man named Henry, looked up from his desk. He smiled when he saw Sarah, then looked confusedly at me in my wet coat and Leo with his dinosaur backpack. Ms. Rossi, Henry said to Sarah. Good evening. I wasn't expecting you back from Europe so soon. And, is this a guest? Henry, Sarah said, slapping her hand on the marble desk. This is Elena Rossi, the owner of Penthouse B, the name on the deed. Henry blinked. Oh, I was told the young lady upstairs, Tiffany, she said she was the owner. The young lady upstairs is a squatter, I said, my voice ringing loud and clear in the echoey lobby. And I'd like you to call the police. I want to report a break-in. Henry's eyes went wide. He looked from me to Sarah, saw the steel in our eyes, and reached for the phone. Right away, Ms. Rossi. Sarah pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding. We stepped inside. As the numbers started to climb, 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, my heart hammered against my ribs. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a justice that had been 29 years in the making. The elevator chimed at the penthouse floor. The doors opened directly into the unit. Music was blasting, something heavy with bass. The smell of expensive weed and cheap perfume hit me instantly. I stepped out of the elevator and into my apartment. It was beautiful, or it had been. The floors were herringbone oak. The windows were massive, framing the city's skyline like a painting. But the space was a disaster. Clothes were draped over every surface. Takeout boxes littered the quartz island in the kitchen. A ring light was set up in the middle of the living room, pointing at the sofa where Tiffany sat holding a glass of wine, laughing into her phone. And so I told him, she was saying to her screen, if you can't handle a girl with high standards, you can't handle me. This is my sanctuary, you know, my space to just be. She looked up. She saw me. She saw Aunt Sarah. She saw the wet footprints we were leaving on the floor. She dropped the phone. "Get out," I said. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than the marble countertops. For a moment, the only sound was the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows and the faint rhythmic bass of the hip-hop track still looping from Tiffany's ring light setup. Tiffany stood frozen in the center of the living room, her face a mask of terrifying realization. She looked from me, soaking wet in my cheap coat, to Aunt Sarah, who looked like a judge, ready to deliver a death sentence, and finally to the phone she had dropped on the herringbone floor. Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling, "You ruined my live stream." It was such a Tiffany thing to say, so completely detached from reality, so absorbed in her digital delusion that I almost laughed. Here she was caught squatting in a stolen apartment, and her primary concern was her viewer count. "Oh, I'm about to ruin a lot more than your live stream," I said, stepping fully into the apartment. I kicked the door shut behind me, engaging the heavy deadbolt with a satisfying clack. "Turn off the music, Tiffany. You can't just barge in here." She shrieked, the shock turning into defensive rage. She scrambled to grab her phone, checking the screen for cracks. "I live here. I have rights. This is my home." "It's not your home," Aunt Sarah said, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. She walked over to the sound system and yanked the power cord out of the wall. The silence that followed was ringing. "It is a crime scene, and you are the perpetrator." "Mom," Tiffany screamed at the ceiling as if Karen could telepathically materialize to save her. "Mom said I could stay here. Dad said it was fine. You guys are just jealous because I'm making something of myself." I looked around the room, really looked at it, and felt a wave of nausea. The apartment was magnificent high ceilings, crown molding a fireplace that looked like it belonged in a French chateau. But Tiffany had treated it like a frat house. There were red wine rings on the white marble island. A pile of dirty laundry sat on the dining table. The beautiful beige sectional sofa, brand new according to Sarah, was covered in what looked like self-tanner stains. "You're disgusting," I said quietly. Tiffany bristled. "Excuse me, my aesthetic is organized chaos. It's trendy." "You're living in filth," I corrected her, "in a home that was gifted to me, a home I didn't even know I owned because you and your parents decided I wasn't classy enough for it." I took a step toward her. "Get your stuff. Now." "No." Tiffany crossed her arms, planting her feet. "I'm not going anywhere. I have guests coming this weekend. I have brand deals pending that require this background. If you kick me out, I'll sue you for lost income." "Sue me." I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "With what money, Tiffany? You don't have a job. You don't have a lease. You don't even have a valid key anymore." "I have squatter's rights," she yelled, throwing out a term she'd probably heard on a TV show. "I've been here for 2 months. You can't evict me without a court order. It takes 90 days. "Actually," Aunt Sarah interjected, pulling a document from her trench coat pocket, "squatter's rights apply to individuals who occupy a property without the owner's permission where there is no lease. However, since you entered the property using keys obtained through fraud and theft, you aren't a squatter, Tiffany. You're a trespasser. And since the value of the property stolen, including the use of this apartment, exceeds $50,000, you're also looking at felony fraud charges." Tiffany's eyes widened. You wouldn't send me to jail. I'm your niece." "I have no niece named Tiffany," Sarah said coldly. "I have a nephew named Leo and a niece named Elena. You're just a mistake your father made." Before Tiffany could respond, there was a frantic pounding at the door. "Tiffany, open up, it's Mom." I looked at Sarah. She nodded. "Let the circus begin." I unlocked the door and threw it open. Karen and Dad tumbled in, soaking wet, breathless, and looking panicked. They must have driven like maniacs to beat the police here. "Thank God," Karen gasped, rushing to Tiffany and hugging her. "Are you okay, baby? Did they hurt you?" "They threatened to arrest me, Mommy," Tiffany wailed, burying her face in Karen's shoulder. "Elena called me a criminal." Dad stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the floor. He looked at me, then at the apartment, then at Sarah. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. "Elena." He started, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Let's all just take a breath. Please, we can fix this." "Fix it?" I asked. staring him down. How, Dad, are you going to build a time machine? Are you going to go back to my birthday and hand me the real keys instead of a plastic keychain? Are you going to erase the last 2 months of me paying rent on a moldy apartment while your golden child destroyed my penthouse? We were going to tell you, Dad pleaded. We wanted Tiffany to get on her feet first. We thought once she makes it big as an influencer, she can buy her own place and then you could have this one. We were thinking of the family economy. The family economy, I repeated, disgusted. You mean Tiffany's economy? It's always about Tiffany. She's younger than you, Karen snapped. Turning around to face me, her protective mother bear mode activated. She needs more help. You're established, Elena. You have a career. You're tough. Tiffany is sensitive. She's an artist. She can't work a 9-to-5 like you do. It would crush her spirit. Her spirit. I stepped closer to Karen, my anger finally boiling over into pure concentrated heat. What about my spirit, Karen? What about when I was pregnant and alone? What about when I was studying for my nursing boards while working 2 jobs? Did you worry about my spirit then? Or did you just tell me that struggle builds character? It did build character, Dad insisted. Look at you, you're strong, you're independent. I'm independent because you abandoned me, I shouted. I'm strong because I had to carry the weight you refused to lift, and you know what I'm done carrying it. I'm done being the bigger person. I'm done being the reasonable one. I pointed to the door. Get her out. All of you, get out of my house. We're not leaving, Karen said, narrowing her eyes. This is a civil matter. You can't kick us out at night in the rain. Tiffany has residency here. I warned you, Aunt Sarah said from the corner. She held up her phone. The police are 2 minutes away, and I specifically asked for the fraud unit. You called the cops on your own brother, Dad asked, his voice cracking. I called the cops on the man who stole from my heir, Sarah corrected. And just so you know, Robert, I'm tallying up the damages. The scratches on the floor, deducted from your inheritance. The stained sofa, deducted. The missing silverware I noticed in the kitchen, deducted. You can't do that, Dad shouted. Mom left that money for all of us. Mom left me as the executor. Sarah smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. With full discretion to withhold funds in cases of gross misconduct. I'd say stealing a $500,000 asset counts as gross misconduct. Tiffany pulled away from Karen, her face blotchy and red. I hate you, she screamed at me. I hate you. Again, you've always been jealous of me. You just want to see me fail. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table, one of the few nice things left in the room, and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 jagged shards, spraying glass across the room. No, Karen gasped. Aunt Sarah didn't even flinch. She just tapped her phone screen. That was a Baccarat crystal vase, vintage, $1,200. Robert, that's coming out of your retirement fund. Tiffany, stop, Dad yelled, grabbing her arm. You're making it worse. I don't care, Tiffany screamed, thrashing in his grip. She kicked over a floor lamp. She swept a row of expensive scented candles off the mantel. If I can't have it, nobody can. It's mine. It was supposed to be mine. I picked up Leo, who was watching with wide, terrified eyes, and carried him to the master bedroom door. Go in here, baby, I whispered, putting his noise-canceling headphones over his ears. Play your game. Mommy will handle this. I closed the bedroom door and turned back to the chaos. Tiffany was now trying to rip the curtains off the rod. Karen was sobbing. Dad was trying to restrain Tiffany. That's enough, I yelled, my voice commanding the room. It was my head nurse voice, the one I used when a trauma bay was spiraling out of control. Tiffany stopped breathing heavily, a torn curtain in her hand. You want to destroy things? I asked, walking calmly toward her. Go ahead. Break it all. Every single thing you break, I will replace with something better, because I can afford it, because I work for my money. But you're done. I looked at the three of them. You think this is about an apartment. This isn't about the apartment. This is about 29 years of you telling me I wasn't worth anything. It's about the Christmas dinners where I sat at the kids' table while Tiffany got the adult seat. It's about the college fund you lost right before my freshman year, but found again when Tiffany graduated high school. It's about the keychain. I laughed, shaking my head. That stupid plastic keychain. If you had just given me nothing, I might have forgiven you eventually. If you had just said, sorry, we can't afford a gift this year, I would have understood. But you had to twist the knife. You had to mock me. You had to give me a piece of trash to distract me from the treasure you stole. Elena, please, Dad whispered. We love you. No, I said. You love having a scapegoat. You love having someone to look down on so you don't have to look at your own failures. But the scapegoat just bought the farm Dad, and I'm evicting the livestock. Heavy pounding on the door interrupted us. Police, open up! Karen let out a wail. Tiffany went pale. I walked to the door and opened it. 2 officers stood there, rain dripping from their brims. Behind them was the doorman looking apologetic. We received a call about a disturbance and a trespassing in progress. The older officer said, looking at the scene, the shattered glass, the overturned lamp, the screaming woman. I'm the owner, I said, pointing to Aunt Sarah. That is my witness and the previous owner who transferred the deed. These people are intruders who refuse to leave. It's a misunderstanding, Karen shrieked, rushing forward. My daughter lives here. Look at her things. The officer looked at Tiffany. Ma'am, can you produce a lease? My parents, Tiffany stammered. Do you have a utility bill in your name at this address? No, my aunt pays the bills, but... Officer... Sarah stepped forward, handing him the folder she had prepared. Here is the deed recorded with the county. Here is the affidavit of forgery regarding the letter claiming my niece gave permission. And here is the text message thread from 10 minutes ago, where I, the acting power of attorney for the building's management, formally revoked any guest privileges. The officer scanned the documents. He looked at the shattered vase. He looked at Tiffany. Ma'am, he said to Tiffany, you need to leave, now, or we will arrest you for criminal trespass and destruction of property. But my stuff, Tiffany cried. I have my clothes, my makeup, my ring light. You have 10 minutes to grab essentials, the officer said, checking his watch. Everything else stays until the owner decides to grant you access to retrieve it. If you break one more thing, you're going out in cuffs. The next 10 minutes were a blur of humiliating defeat for the golden child. Tiffany ran around the apartment, shoving designer clothes into black garbage bags, weeping loudly. Karen followed her, trying to save her cosmetics, glaring at me with pure hatred. Dad just stood by the window, staring out at the rain, a man who realized he had bet on the wrong horse and lost the entire stable. Time's up, the officer said. Tiffany dragged 2 bursting trash bags to the door. She looked like a refugee from a fashion show gone wrong. Her mascara was running, her hair was frizzy, and her vintage Gucci top was stained with sweat. She stopped in front of me. I hope you die in this apartment, she hissed. I hope you die alone. I won't be alone, I said calmly. I have my son, and I have my self-respect. 2 things you'll never understand. Let's go, folks, the officer said, ushering them out. Karen paused at the door. You've destroyed this family, Elena. Are you happy? I looked at Aunt Sarah, who was inspecting the damage to the floor with a grim but satisfied expression. I looked at the bedroom door where Leo was safe. I looked at the keys in my hand, the real, heavy brass keys to my new life. Destroyed it? I asked. Karen, I'm just taking out the trash. I slammed the door in her face. The silence that returned was different this time. It wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a battlefield after the enemy has surrendered. I leaned against the door, my legs finally shaking. Aunt Sarah walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. You did good, kid, she whispered. You did real good. They hate me. I said, tears finally spilling over. My own father looked at me like I was a monster. Let him, Sarah said firmly. He looked at you with fear. For the first time in his life, he respects you. He fears you. And frankly, for men like Robert, that's the closest thing to love they're capable of. She kicked a piece of the broken vase aside. Now, we have work to do. I'm calling a 24-hour locksmith to change these tumblers. Then I'm calling a cleaning crew. I want every trace of that girl's cheap perfume scrubbed out of these walls before Leo wakes up tomorrow. I wiped my eyes and nodded. I walked over to the window and looked down. I could see them on the sidewalk below, 3 small figures standing in the rain loading garbage bags into the trunk of Dad's sedan. They looked pathetic. They looked small. For the first time in 29 years, I was looking down on them, and the view was spectacular. The locksmith arrived 40 minutes after the police left. He was a quiet man with heavy boots who didn't ask questions about the shattered vase or the faint smell of stale wine and panic that still hung in the air. He just went to work on the front door, drilling out the tumblers that my stepmother had unauthorized copies of. "You want the high-security deadbolt?" he asked, looking at the expensive mahogany frame. "I want the kind that keeps out family," I said. He nodded solemnly. "I'll put in the Medeco. Nobody gets in unless you want them to." While he worked, Aunt Sarah and I began the process of reclaiming the space. It wasn't just about cleaning, it was an exorcism. We moved through the apartment room by room, assessing the damage and removing every trace of Tiffany's existence. It was in the kitchen inside a drawer Tiffany had seemingly used as a junk catch-all that we found the final piece of the puzzle. It was a stack of mail. My mail. "Look at this." I whispered, my voice trembling as I pulled out envelopes that had been slit open and then shoved into the back of the drawer. There were bank statements from an account I didn't recognize, likely the one Sarah had set up for the building's HOA fees. But buried beneath those were letters. Personal letters on Sarah's thick, cream-colored stationery, postmarked from Paris, Rome, and Berlin. I opened one dated a month ago. "My dearest Elena, I hope you are settling in well. I found this vintage medical text in a shop in the Latin Quarter and thought of you. I know you're probably busy with the move and Leo, but I can't wait to hear what you think of the view from the balcony. You deserve to look out at the world from a high place. Love, Aunt Sarah." I looked up at Sarah, tears streaming down my face. "You wrote to me. You kept writing." And they intercepted every single one. Sarah said, her face hardening into a mask of pure fury as she took the letter from my hand. "Karen must have been coming over here to check the mail, filtering out anything that would have tipped you off. They didn't just steal a house, Elena. They stole our relationship. They stole my words to you." She slammed the drawer shut. "That's it. I was going to wait until Monday to call my lawyer about the estate, but I'm emailing him tonight. They are dead to me." The next month was a blur of exhausting, exhilarating transformation. I hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub the apartment from floor to ceiling. I wanted every skin cell, every stray hair, every molecule of Tiffany's DNA eradicated. I donated the furniture she had curated, which was mostly overpriced, trendy garbage, to a women's shelter. Sarah insisted on buying me new furniture pieces that were solid, timeless, and comfortable. "This is not a showroom," she told me as we tested sofas. "This is a home. Get the one you can fall asleep on." For the first time in my life, I wasn't scavenging for leftovers. I was choosing. I chose a deep navy velvet sectional that Leo could jump on. I chose a sturdy oak dining table where we could do homework without it wobbling. I chose blackout curtains for the master bedroom so I could actually sleep after a night shift. And the villains, their collapse was swift and spectacular. Tiffany's downfall was the most public. A week after the eviction, she posted a tearful black and white video on TikTok titled "Bullied Out of My Own Home, the Truth." In it, she claimed she had been ambushed by a jealous relative and thrown onto the street without warning. She tried to spin a narrative of victimhood, crying about her trauma and her broken vintage vase. She made one critical mistake, she tagged me. "The internet is a cruel place, but sometimes it is a detective agency." I didn't even have to respond. A few of my fellow nurses saw the video. Then a few neighbors from the building who had witnessed the police escorting her out weighed in. At Nurse Jen. "Girl, aren't you the one who was squatting in your sister's house while she was working double shifts saving kids? Take a seat." At Skyline Neighbor. "I live in 4B. The police kicked you out because you didn't own it. Also, you left trash in the hallway constantly. Good riddance." The comments section turned into a roast. Tiffany tried to delete the negative comments, but they came too fast. Within 48 hours, she had deactivated her account. The influencer career was over before it began. She was back in my father's basement, living in a windowless room surrounded by the garbage bags of clothes she had dragged out of my apartment. Karen, however, possessed a level of delusion that was almost admirable in its audacity. 2 weeks after the eviction, I received a letter from her. It wasn't an apology. It was an invoice. Elena. Since you have chosen to be unreasonable and cruel, your father and I feel it is only fair that you reimburse us for the expenses incurred in setting up the apartment you are now enjoying. Tiffany spent considerable time and effort acting as a property manager. Enclosed is a bill for interior design services and management fees for the months of September and October, totaled $12,500. I stared at the piece of paper, sipping coffee in my sun-drenched kitchen. They wanted me to pay them for the time they spent stealing my house. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I simply took a lighter from the drawer, walked to the beautiful marble fireplace, my fireplace, and set the corner of the invoice on fire. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words, management fees, turning to ash. I snapped a photo of the burning paper and texted it to Karen. No caption, just the fire. She never texted back. December arrived, bringing with it the first snow of the year. From the penthouse windows, the city looked like a snow globe, silent and white. In years past, the holidays were a source of dread. I would stress about buying gifts I couldn't afford for people who didn't like me. I would worry about having the right dress for Karen's parties. I would brace myself for the inevitable backhanded compliments about my tired appearance. This year, I felt nothing but peace. We're hosting Christmas, I told Leo one morning as we made pancakes. Will Grandpa be there? He asked, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth. No, baby, I said gently. Grandpa is on a timeout. A very long timeout, but Aunt Sarah is coming, and Nurse Jen, and Dr. Patel and his husband, and your friend Sam from school. Leo's face lit up. The good people, yes. I smiled, kissing the top of his head. The good people. Christmas Eve was magical. The apartment was filled with the smell of roasting garlic and rosemary, not the store-bought catering Karen always served. The tree in the corner was 12 feet tall, decorated with ornaments Leo and I had made ourselves, along with the expensive glass ones Sarah had brought from Europe. Around 7:00 p.m., the intercom buzzed. I walked to the panel on the wall. The camera feed showed the lobby. Standing there wearing a coat that looked a little too thin for the weather was my father. He was holding a small, wrapped box. My heart gave a single painful thump. Old habits die hard. The little girl inside me wanted to buzz him in. She wanted to believe he was here to apologize, to tell me he loved me, to choose me. Ms. Rossi. Henry the doorman's voice came over the speaker. There is a Mr. Robert Rossi here to see you. He says he's your father. I looked at the screen. Dad looked up at the camera, his eyes pleading. He mouthed the word, please. I thought about the folding table in the hallway. I thought about the forged letter. I thought about the plastic keychain. I thought about Tiffany living in luxury while I counted pennies for Leo's inhaler. Henry, I said, my voice steady. I'm not expecting any visitors. Please tell the gentleman he has the wrong address. There was a pause. On the screen, I saw Dad flinch as if he'd been struck. Understood, Ms. Rossi, Henry said. I watched as Henry stepped between my father and the elevator bank. They spoke for a moment. Dad argued, pointed at the camera, then slumped. He turned around and walked out into the snow, the small gift still in his hand. I turned off the monitor and walked back into the living room. Who was it? Aunt Sarah asked. She was sitting in the navy armchair, a glass of wine in one hand, Leo sitting on the floor at her feet, playing with a new Lego set. Nobody, I said, picking up my own wine glass. Just a solicitor. Sarah studied my face for a moment, then nodded. She raised her glass. To nobody. To nobody, I repeated. The dinner that followed was the best of my life. There was laughter, loud, raucous, genuine laughter that bounced off the high ceilings. There was no tension, no judgment, just a group of people who had seen each other through 12-hour shifts, life and death emergencies, and personal crises breaking bread together. After dessert, Sarah clinked her spoon against her glass. I have a little announcement, she said, standing up. She looked older than she had 6 months ago, but stronger, too. The hip had healed, but the betrayal had hardened her in a necessary way. As you all know, I recently updated my estate plan. She began looking directly at me. For years, my will was a standard split between my brother Robert and his children. I assumed family was family. The room went quiet. Even Leo seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. However, Sarah continued, recent events have clarified the definition of family for me. I met with my lawyers yesterday. Robert, Karen, and Tiffany have been removed as beneficiaries. Completely. There is a clause that specifically states that any attempt by them to contest the will result in the entirety of the estate being donated to the local cat rescue society. Laughter rippled through the room. The entirety of my estate. Sarah said, her eyes locking on mine, including my portfolio of properties. My investments and this apartment will pass to the only person who has ever cared for me without asking for a receipt, Elena. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She handed it to me. Open it. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside wasn't a diamond or gold. It was a keychain, but not a plastic one. It was made of heavy, solid platinum shaped like a small house. Engraved on the back were 3 words, earned not given. You don't need my money, Sarah said softly. You have your own career. You just got promoted to head nurse last week. Congratulations, by the way. But I want you to know that you will never, ever have to worry about security again. You won the war, Elena. I took the platinum keychain out of the box. It was heavy. It felt like an anchor. It felt like truth. I stood up and hugged her, burying my face in her shoulder. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me. I always saw you, she whispered back. I was just waiting for you to see yourself. Later that night, after the guests had left and Leo was asleep in his dinosaur-themed bedroom, I stepped out onto the balcony. The snow had stopped and the city was glittering below me. The air was crisp and cold, biting at my cheeks. I looked down at the streets. Somewhere out there in a damp basement in the suburbs, Tiffany was probably scrolling through her phone, bitter and jealous. Somewhere Dad was lying awake wondering where he went wrong. Somewhere Karen was plotting her next move, not realizing the game was already over. They were ghosts to me now, fading echoes of a life I used to live. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate takes energy. Hate requires you to care. I felt something far worse for them, indifference. I had evicted them from my home, but more importantly, I had evicted them from my head. I looked at the platinum keychain in my hand, catching the moonlight. Then I looked at the glass reflection in the window. I saw a woman standing tall shoulders back, wearing silk instead of scrubs. A woman who owned her home, her career, and her future. The daughter they had created the scapegoat, the servant, the shadow was dead. She died the moment I dropped that plastic keychain into the sewer. The woman standing on the balcony was someone else entirely. She was the matriarch of her own life, and she had the keys to prove it. I took a sip of wine, the warmth spreading through my chest, and smiled at the city that finally felt like mine. Welcome home, Elena, I whispered to the wind. You know, looking back at that moment in the hallway sitting at a wobbly folding table while my sister sat at the head of the dining room, I realized that the biggest tragedy wasn't that they treated me like a second-class citizen. The tragedy was that for 29 years, I let them. We often tell ourselves a very dangerous lie that if we are just quiet enough, helpful enough, and accommodating enough, the people who hurt us will finally wake up and love us. We think that if we accept the plastic keychain with a smile, maybe next year, they'll give us the respect we crave. But the hard truth I learned in that penthouse is that you cannot earn your worth from people who profit from your worthlessness. My father and stepmother needed me to be the struggle, so that Tiffany could be the success. My pain was the foundation their ego was built on. The moment I dropped that plastic Eiffel Tower into the sewer wasn't just about throwing away a bad gift. It was about realizing that I had been starving for affection for so long that I was grateful for crumbs, never realizing I owned the whole bakery. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Do not set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Family isn't determined by whose DNA you share. It's determined by who hands you a towel when you're soaking wet in the rain. It's determined by who defends your name when you're not in the room. Aunt Sarah didn't have to save me. She chose to. And that choice is what makes her family. If you are holding on to a plastic keychain right now, whether it's a toxic relationship, a one-sided friendship, or a family that makes you feel small, I hope this story gives you the courage to drop it. You deserve the platinum life. You deserve the view from the top floor. But you will never get there if you keep trying to unlock the door with the wrong keys. If this story resonated with you, if you felt that spark of anger and that wave of relief when justice was finally served, then you are in the right place. This channel is dedicated to everyone who has ever been the underdog, the scapegoat, or the black sheep. Please take a second to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. By subscribing, you're not just watching videos, you're joining a community of people who are learning to stand tall. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, please share this video with them. You never know. Your share might be the sign they've been waiting for to change their life. If you enjoyed seeing Tiffany and Karen get exactly what they deserved, you are going to love the video on your screen right now. It's another story about a family who pushed their daughter too far and learned the hard way that the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. Click that video and let's keep the justice train moving. I'll see you there.